You are holding a device in your hand right now that required materials from 6 continents, manufacturing processes colder than outer space, a gas so rare it literally floats off the planet and is lost forever once released, and a shipping lane so narrow that 2 oil tankers can barely pass each other without scraping hulls. If that shipping lane closes, and right now there is a very real chance that it will, your next iPhone might not exist. Neither will your next laptop, or your next car, or the MRI machine your doctor uses to look inside your body, or the artificial intelligence systems that half the global economy is racing to build. And almost nobody understands why. The device you're holding contains a tiny chip. That chip is the most complex object ever manufactured by human beings. It contains more transistors than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Those transistors are etched at a width of 3 nanometers, which is roughly the width of 12 atoms sitting side by side. A single human hair is 25,000 times wider than one of these transistors. Manufacturing something this impossibly small requires conditions that do not exist naturally anywhere on Earth. The fabrication facility, called a fab, must maintain air 1,000 times cleaner than a hospital operating room. A single particle of dust landing on a silicon wafer during production would be, at the scale of the transistors, the equivalent of a boulder crashing into a city block. The lithography machines that etch these circuits use extreme ultraviolet light, a wavelength so short and so energetic that it can only exist in a vacuum. The mirrors inside these machines are polished to a smoothness of less than 1 atom of variation across their entire surface. These machines cost more than $350 million each, weigh over 180 tons, and only one company on Earth, ASML in the Netherlands, knows how to build them. But even with all of this, even with the most advanced machines in human history, even with clean rooms that make outer space look dusty, you still cannot manufacture these chips without one specific element: helium. Most people think of helium as the gas that fills birthday balloons and makes your voice squeaky. That is helium's least important use, and it might be the most dangerous misunderstanding in the modern economy. Helium is the second most abundant element in the universe, but on Earth it is extraordinarily rare, and getting rarer. Unlike other gases, helium is so light that when it is released into the atmosphere, it rises, escapes Earth's gravity, and drifts into space. Permanently. Every atom of helium that escapes is gone forever. It does not come back. It does not cycle through the atmosphere like oxygen or nitrogen. It leaves the planet. The helium we use is not captured from the air. It is extracted from deep underground where it has been trapped in rock formations for hundreds of millions of years, alongside natural gas deposits. It is a byproduct of radioactive decay from uranium and thorium in the Earth's crust. It took billions of years to accumulate. We are burning through it in decades. And this is where the story connects to the most dangerous waterway on Earth. Approximately 40% of the world's helium supply comes from a single country, Qatar, a tiny peninsula nation jutting out from the eastern coast of the Arabian Peninsula into the Persian Gulf. Qatar sits on the North Field, the single largest natural gas field on the planet, shared with Iran across the maritime border. When Qatar extracts natural gas from the North Field, helium comes with it. Qatar has invested billions of dollars in helium extraction and purification facilities, making it the dominant supplier of this irreplaceable element. And every single shipment of Qatari helium must pass through one choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the open Arabian Sea beyond. At its narrowest point, it's just 21 miles wide. The shipping lanes that tankers and cargo vessels must navigate are even narrower, only 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. 4 miles of navigable water. That's it. Through this absurdly narrow passage flows approximately 21% of all the oil consumed on Earth every single day, roughly 20 million barrels. 1/5 of the global oil supply passes through a gap you could see across with a decent pair of binoculars. But the oil, as critical as it is only part of the story. Through this same strait passes roughly 1/3 of all liquefied natural gas traded globally, and with that natural gas trapped inside it and separated at processing facilities comes the helium. 40% of the world's helium supply flows through a passage narrower than many rivers. Now, let me explain what happens if that passage closes, because what happens is not what you think. The immediate headlines would be about oil prices. They would spike instantly. Every barrel of crude on the global market would jump by $30 to $50 within hours. Gas stations would see lines within days. Airlines would cancel flights. Heating costs would surge. That's the obvious, visible crisis. But beneath the surface, a slower and far more devastating crisis would begin unfolding, one that most governments, most economists, and certainly most media outlets are not prepared to explain. The helium stops. And when the helium stops, the chips stop. Let me take you inside a semiconductor fabrication facility to show you why. The process of manufacturing a modern processor chip involves over 1,000 individual steps, many of which must be performed in sequence with zero errors over a period of approximately 3 months. A single chip takes about 70 to 80 days to manufacture from raw silicon wafer to finished processor. Helium is used in at least 5 critical stages of this process, and there is currently no substitute for it in any of them. First, cooling. Semiconductor lithography machines generate enormous heat. The extreme ultraviolet light source at the heart of the machine produces temperatures comparable to the surface of the sun. Helium is used as a cooling medium because of its unique thermal properties. It has the highest thermal conductivity of any gas. It remains a gas at temperatures near absolute zero. It is chemically inert, meaning it will not react with any of the delicate materials inside the machine. No other element can do all 3 of these things simultaneously. Second, leak detection. The vacuum chambers inside lithography machines must be absolutely sealed. Even a microscopic leak could allow contamination that would destroy every wafer in the chamber. Helium atoms are the smallest atoms that exist in a stable, non-reactive form. They are so small that they can penetrate leaks that no other detection method can find. Engineers pressurize systems with helium and use mass spectrometers to detect even a few atoms escaping. This is the gold standard for leak detection in semiconductor manufacturing, and there is no alternative that approaches its sensitivity. Third, controlled atmosphere processing. Several stages of chip fabrication require processing in an ultra-pure inert atmosphere. Helium provides this atmosphere because it will not react with silicon, will not react with the photoresist chemicals, and will not react with the metal interconnects being deposited on the chip. Nitrogen and argon can substitute in some steps, but for the most sensitive processes, helium's smaller atomic size and superior thermal properties make it irreplaceable. Fourth, wafer transport and handling. In some advanced fabs, helium environments are used during wafer transport between processing stations to prevent any oxidation or contamination during movement. At 3 nanometer process nodes, even a few atoms of oxygen bonding to the wrong surface can ruin a circuit. Fifth, fiber optic production. The cables that connect servers in data centers, that carry internet traffic across oceans, and that link the global telecommunications infrastructure are made of ultra-pure glass fibers. Helium atmospheres are required during the drawing process that creates these fibers, preventing contamination that would degrade signal quality. Without helium, you cannot manufacture advanced semiconductors, period. There is no workaround. There is no alternative gas. There is no emergency substitute. The laws of physics do not offer a plan B. And this brings us to the device in your hand. The chip inside your iPhone was almost certainly manufactured by Taiwan's Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, at one of its fabrication facilities in Taiwan, using ASML lithography machines from the Netherlands, running processes that consumed helium likely extracted from Qatari natural gas that was shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. But it is not just your iPhone. It is every iPhone, every Samsung Galaxy, every Google Pixel. It is every laptop, every desktop computer, every server in every data center operated by Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Meta.
It is the processors inside every modern automobile, which now contain an average of over 1,000 individual chips per vehicle. It is the guidance systems inside every military weapon. It is the chips inside every satellite, every air traffic control system, every power grid management computer, every medical device, and every piece of telecommunications equipment on the planet. The modern world runs on semiconductors. Semiconductors require helium. 40% of helium comes from Qatar. Qatar's helium ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Block the strait, and you do not just cause an oil crisis, you begin strangling the global technology supply chain at its most fundamental level. Now consider who controls the other side of that strait. Iran. Iran's coastline runs along the entire northern edge of the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian territory includes islands positioned directly in the shipping lanes. Iran has spent decades fortifying these islands and its coastal installations with one strategic objective in mind: the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz at will. Iran possesses thousands of anti-ship missiles positioned in hardened bunkers along its coastline. It operates a fleet of fast attack boats specifically designed for swarming tactics in the narrow waters of the strait. These small, fast, highly maneuverable vessels can overwhelm larger warships through sheer numbers. Iran has an extensive inventory of naval mines, thousands of them, that can be deployed rapidly to make the shipping lanes impassable. Modern naval mines are sophisticated weapons that can distinguish between different types of vessels, lie dormant for months, and resist minesweeping operations. Iran also commands drone technology that has proven capable of striking targets across the Persian Gulf with precision. Its ballistic and cruise missile arsenal can reach every port, every oil terminal, every desalination plant, and every military installation on the Arabian side of the Gulf. But perhaps the most concerning capability is the simplest one. Iran doesn't even need to use weapons to disrupt the strait. It merely needs to declare the strait unsafe. Insurance companies, the invisible hand that actually governs global shipping, would respond instantly. Insurance premiums for vessels transiting the strait would skyrocket. Dozens of shipping companies would simply refuse to send their tankers through the strait. The flow of oil, gas, and helium would slow to a trickle, not because of missiles, but because of mathematics. The cost of ensuring the passage would exceed the value of the cargo. During the tanker wars of the 1980s, when Iran and Iraq both targeted commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf, insurance premiums increased over 1,500%. Dozens of tankers were attacked. The U.S. Navy eventually intervened with Operation Earnest Will, escorting reflagged Kuwaiti tankers through the strait. But today, the weapons are far more advanced, the drones are far cheaper, and the economic consequences are exponentially greater because the world has become exponentially more dependent on what flows through that water. Let me quantify what a closure would mean. 21% of the world's oil supply disappears from the market overnight. Oil prices don't just spike, they enter uncharted territory. In 2022, when Russia's invasion of Ukraine merely threatened a fraction of global oil supply, prices surged above $130 per barrel. A full closure of Hormuz would likely push oil above $200, possibly $300. Some analysts have modeled scenarios exceeding $400 per barrel.
One-third of global liquefied natural gas trade ceases. Europe, which pivoted aggressively to LNG imports after cutting off Russian pipeline gas, would face an immediate energy crisis. Asian economies, particularly Japan and South Korea, which are almost entirely dependent on imported LNG, would face potential blackouts within weeks as strategic reserves deplete. 40% of global helium supply vanishes. Semiconductor fabs begin rationing helium within days. Within weeks, production lines start shutting down. TSMC, Samsung, Intel, and every other chipmaker begins prioritizing which chips to continue manufacturing with dwindling helium reserves. Military and critical infrastructure chips go first. Consumer electronics go last. Within 2 to 3 months, the global semiconductor supply chain enters crisis. New iPhones are not manufactured. New cars cannot be completed because they lack the dozens of critical chips needed for engine management, safety systems, infotainment, and driver assistance.
Laptop and PC production drops dramatically. Server production for data centers slows, meaning cloud computing capacity stops growing at precisely the moment the world is racing to build artificial intelligence infrastructure. Within 6 months, the economic damage becomes structural. Industries that depend on a steady supply of advanced chips, which is essentially every industry in a modern economy, begin experiencing cascading failures. Automotive plants shut down, consumer electronics companies miss product launches, AI development timelines are pushed back by years, medical device production slows, meaning hospitals cannot replace aging equipment. And all of this, every bit of it, traces back to a 21-mile-wide stretch of water on the other side of the world for most of the people affected by it. This is the hidden fragility of the modern global economy. We have built the most advanced technological civilization in human history on a supply chain that passes through a single geographic choke point controlled by a nation that is currently in active military conflict with the world's largest superpower. And the helium problem is even deeper than the immediate supply disruption. Remember, helium is a non-renewable resource. Unlike oil, which we can at least theoretically replace with alternative energy, there is no alternative to helium for its critical applications. The United States once held a massive strategic helium reserve in Amarillo, Texas, stored in a natural underground geological formation called the Bush Dome. For decades, this reserve served as a buffer against supply disruptions. But in 1996, the U.S. government, in a decision that scientists have called one of the most short-sighted policy mistakes in modern history, passed the Helium Privatization Act and began selling off the reserve at artificially low prices to reduce the national debt. By 2023, the federal helium reserve was effectively depleted. The United States went from holding the world's largest strategic helium reserve to holding almost nothing, right as global demand for helium was surging due to semiconductor manufacturing, space exploration, quantum computing research, and medical imaging. Other helium sources exist. The United States still produces helium from natural gas fields in Texas, Wyoming, and Kansas. Algeria and Russia produce significant quantities. Australia and Tanzania have developing helium projects. But none of these sources individually can replace Qatar's 40% share of global supply on short notice. Bringing new helium production online takes years of exploration, drilling, and construction of specialized extraction and purification facilities. The global helium market was already experiencing periodic shortages before any Strait of Hormuz crisis. The industry has gone through 4 major supply crunches in the past 15 years, each one disrupting semiconductor manufacturing, scientific research, and medical imaging. Each shortage was caused by relatively minor supply disruptions, a plant going offline for maintenance, a pipeline issue, a logistics delay. A closure of the Strait of Hormuz would not be a minor disruption. It would be the largest single supply shock in the history of the helium market. And it would arrive at a moment when global helium demand is higher than it has ever been, driven by the explosive growth of semiconductor fabrication and the artificial intelligence boom that requires ever more powerful chips manufactured at ever smaller process nodes using ever more helium. There is a deep irony in all of this. The technology industry, which presents itself as the future of human civilization, as post-industrial, as clean, as digital, as somehow floating above the messy physical world of oil tankers and shipping lanes, is in reality utterly dependent on the same geography, the same choke points, and the same geopolitical tensions that have defined conflict in the Middle East for a century. Your iPhone is not a product of Silicon Valley alone. It is a product of Qatari gas fields, Dutch lithography machines, Taiwanese fabrication plants, Congolese cobalt mines, and a 21-mile-wide strait that an Iranian speedboat can cross in 45 minutes. The digital world is built on a physical foundation, and that foundation passes through the most contested waterway on Earth. But this vulnerability is not inevitable, and this is where the story becomes one not just of risk, but of possibility. The reason the Strait of Hormuz matters so much is because the global economy is addicted to what flows through it.
oil for energy, gas for heating and electricity, and helium trapped in that gas for the chips that run everything. Break the addiction, and you break the choke point's power. Countries that generate their own energy from wind, solar, geothermal, and hydroelectric sources do not need oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz to keep their lights on. Denmark doesn't care if Hormuz closes because Denmark generates over half its electricity from wind turbines standing in the North Sea. Iceland doesn't care because Iceland pulls energy from the volcanic heat beneath its own feet. Costa Rica doesn't care because its rivers and geothermal vents produce 99% of its electricity. For these countries, the Strait of Hormuz is a news story, not an existential threat. But the helium problem remains, and this is where the next frontier of technological independence lies. The semiconductor industry knows it has a helium vulnerability. Research is accelerating into helium recycling and recapture systems that could recover and reuse up to 97% of helium used in fab processes, dramatically reducing dependence on new supply. Some advanced fabs are already implementing closed-loop helium systems that recapture, purify, and recirculate helium rather than venting it into the atmosphere where it is lost forever. Simultaneously, research into alternative cooling technologies for lithography machines, including advanced liquid cooling and novel gas mixtures, is being funded at levels never seen before. The goal is not to eliminate helium entirely, which may be physically impossible for some applications, but to reduce consumption to a level that can be sustained by non-Qatari sources. And there is a longer-term possibility that sounds like science fiction, but is actively being explored. Helium is produced by nuclear fusion, the same process that powers the sun. As fusion energy research advances, the prospect of actually producing helium as a byproduct of clean energy generation becomes real. Fusion reactors, if they are ever commercialized, would produce two things: virtually unlimited clean energy and helium. The solution to the energy crisis and the helium crisis might turn out to be the same technology. But we are not there yet. Today, right now, the Strait of Hormuz remains the single most critical choke point in the global technology supply chain, and the conflict unfolding around it threatens not just oil prices and gas supplies, but the very foundation of the semiconductor industry that makes modern civilization possible. The phone in your hand is a miracle of engineering. It required the most advanced manufacturing processes ever devised, materials from every corner of the planet, and a supply chain of breathtaking complexity and fragility. And it all runs through a strait you have probably never thought about, in a body of water smaller than most of the Great Lakes, bordered by nations locked in a conflict that most people understand only as a fight over oil. It's not just about oil. It was never just about oil. It's about helium. It's about chips. It's about the invisible thread that connects a gas field in Qatar to a fabrication plant in Taiwan to a device in your pocket. Pull that thread, and the modern world unravels. That's why the Strait of Hormuz controls your iPhone. And until the world builds supply chains that do not pass through a single choke point, until nations generate their own energy and develop their own sources of critical materials, until the semiconductor industry frees itself from its dependence on a gas that ships through the most dangerous waterway on Earth, your next phone, your next car, your next medical scan, and the next generation of artificial intelligence all depend on 21 miles of water staying open. 21 miles. That's the distance between the world you know it and the world you wouldn't recognize.